What is going on, everybody, and welcome back into Dog Talk with your host, Holden. I'm glad to have you guys here again tonight as we get ready to prep up for the SEC Championship game that we've got coming on Saturday night afternoon, late afternoon, early evening, 4 o'clock here in Georgia, at least at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a big one. It's a big game on tap. A lot to get to in this episode. We've got a lot of stuff to kind of prep and get ready for this game. A lot of stuff to talk about kind of leading up to it, and then the implications of which are standing in the way of this game. Win, lose, whatever it is that happens in this. We're going to kind of talk about all of it. We're going to kind of give as many scenarios as I can in this that I've looked at and kind of thought about and seen other people talking about as well, and just the rumblings that you hear throughout the week. So a lot to get to in this episode, and I'm excited to get to it. Appreciate as always every week that you guys are here, especially now getting back on this visual side of things. If you guys are listening to us on podcast right now and you go, man, I'd like to watch the show, hey, check it out on YouTube. Click the link in the description below and you will find wherever you're listening on podcast, you will find in that description a link tree. Just click it and it'll take you to where you can click that YouTube link and watch the show if you guys are interested in doing it that way. If you like just listening, hey, I appreciate that just as well. So glad to have you guys here. One other thing that I did want to mention that I forgot to mention last week, and it's been a little bit that since I've actually mentioned this. If you guys ever want to reach out to the show, you can always DM in whatever way, whether it's on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, any of the places. They're X, excuse me. But there's also one other way that you can do things now. You can actually leave a voicemail for the show. You don't have a phone number or anything like that to call, but there is a speak pipe link in the description of the podcast. Again, whether you're watching on YouTube or wherever it is that you're listening on podcast, you can click that link. And it gives you the opportunity to just click record, and it doesn't matter if you're on a phone, if you got headphones on your computer, it does not matter. You can leave a recording and send it into the show, and you have the potential of that being played on the show at some point coming up. I try to check on that pretty much every week to see if anybody ever reaches out on there, but I haven't put it out there a lot that you can do that. But if you got an opinion or something that I talk about in the episode this week, any week, and you just want to kind of talk about that or say, hey, you have no idea what you're talking about, whatever it is that you want to say, feel free to do that. There is that speak pipe link in the description as well. And any kind of way that you guys want to reach out, I greatly appreciate it. But again, if you're here, hit that thumbs up button, whether you're listening, watching on YouTube, I'd appreciate it. Make sure you guys subscribe. So a lot of stuff to get to. First thing we're going to kind of talk about going through the news and notes of things here is we're going to look at the college football playoff rankings that obviously came out earlier in the week on Tuesday. We've got signing day that is now hit as well. And then obviously the portal is heating up. We've got an injury update to get to, going through our injury report that usually comes out here on Thursdays before the game coming up on Saturday. And then we're going to run through previewing the entire SEC championship game. There are a bunch of other conference championship games that are going on this weekend as well. Some of the news and notes when we go through this college football playoff ranking, we're going to talk about some of the games that I'm not going to say don't matter, but at least we know some of the teams that are pretty much locked in and pretty much guaranteed, hey, you're in. You don't have to worry about being left out of this. And we're going to look at that and say, okay, well, here's probably 10 teams, I would say maybe is what the number is at, where you guys are pretty much locked in. The percentage of this is you don't have a chance to really drop out of this, barring, I guess, like a 50-0 blowout in your conference championship game. For the most part, these teams that we're going to kind of run through and talk about, you're a lock, win, lose, or draw. The determinant factor is, okay, if you win, boom, you've got this that's going to happen for you. And if you lose, well, this is possibly what you could be playing in as they went through some of these playoff predictions. And a lot of them, they almost made it seem like, hey, these are set in stone. These are kind of set in stone where they are, regardless of what happens in some of these games. Don't necessarily like that in some cases, but then in other cases, I look at it and I go, okay, that's kind of understandable. Some of it, I think there's a little bit that's going to change when it comes to that show that's going to come out on Sunday. But we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit as we kind of get into it. Let's start off first and foremost. Let's look at what the college football playoff ranking has ranked, at least the top 15, because I think that those are at least the numbers that kind of matter a little bit. A couple of which below that are going to matter in the slightest, again, because they are playing in conference championship games that are actually outside of that top 12. And I tweeted about this, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit throughout the season, but especially now where we're getting into the grind where it is college football playoff rankings. When these rankings start to come out, does the first one matter? Not necessarily. But all of the ones leading up to this one that's coming up on Sunday, they matter a lot because all of a sudden those positions that you're in, it starts determining, okay, am I getting a bye if I win this conference championship game, or am I still just at a what is a home field advantage, essentially hosting a first round playoff game, whichever way it is. So they're starting to matter a lot, and like we talked about, kind of leading into this, you don't have to be in the top 12 to be in the college football playoffs, and that's going to happen this year. I have a feeling more than likely we might have one, potentially two teams that are getting into the top 12 without being ranked in the top 12. The weird part about it is kind of the way that the structure of the college football playoff is. Just because you might be playing in let's just say what right now Georgia would be, in their prediction at least, is 7th, you might not be ranked 7th. You could be ranked 5th in the case of Georgia right now in this playoff ranking, and then you might have a team that's ranked 15th or even 12th, maybe that could be 4th, or 10th that could be 4th. So some of these things are interesting, very interesting to look at and talk about, and that's kind of what I want to do in this. Like I said, we'll run through really quickly and just kind of look at what the top 25 looks at as far as this college football playoff ranking system goes. A lot of it's not terribly far off of what the AP poll is, but there are some discrepancies in there, and I do think that they matter, especially when it comes to the seeding of certain things. There is some conversation to be had about some of this because some of it I don't agree with. Some of it, none of it there's anything we can do about other than just gripe about it. And Lane Kiffin's done that enough for a lot of us. There have been a couple of other guys that have kind of fought for their teams, and there's also been a couple of conferences, like the ACC, for example, that is fighting for a couple of teams to be in and vying for their position to be in, which they didn't really do last year. Shout out FSU. But they're doing that this year, trying to get some of these teams in. But nonetheless, let's run through the top 25 of this college football playoff ranking. If you guys haven't seen or heard of it yet, we're just going to run through it so that way we kind of know where things stand. Oregon's still at first, Texas at second. Obviously, Ohio State lost last weekend. I can't remember if we really talked about Ohio State and Michigan that game. What a bad loss for Ohio State. That's all there is to it. If there's a year in place for you to beat Michigan, it was this year, and still didn't happen. A lot of questions for Ryan Day and that. But I digress. Let's go through it. Texas 2, Penn State 3, Notre Dame 4, Georgia 5, Ohio State 6, Tennessee 7, SMU at 8, Indiana 9, Boise State at 10, Alabama at 11. Miami falls all the way down to 12th in this. Again, we're going to talk about a couple of these things here. Ole Miss at 13, South Carolina 14, Arizona State 15. Iowa State 16, Clemson, they fall all the way down to 17th. That matters because they're now in the ACC championship game. BYU 18, Missouri 19, UNLV at 20, Illinois at 21, Syracuse 22, Colorado 23, Army 24, and Memphis 25. So that, again, is the college football playoff rankings. This is the ranking that matters almost the most leading up to this final one that we're going to get on Sunday. I have some questions about some of these rankings. Some of them don't necessarily matter to me, but one of the things that I do want to point out, and we've somewhat talked about this, we've somewhat griped about it in years past, is how teams seem to fall differently. When one team loses, even if it's a similar loss in the way that another team loses, why does one team fall so many spots but the other doesn't? And I get it. Some of this we're looking at, hey, there's a lot of games going on. And if this is happening with one game, and this is happening with another, well, we've got other things that are moving too at the same time, so we can't just move everybody at the same spot. But when I look at least 1 through 16, there's only one team in that falls, again, with exception of Clemson, who's at 17, but there's only one team that falls, and that's Ohio State, and they only fall 4 spots to a not good Michigan team. A Michigan team who I'm fairly certain, I could be wrong, I think is just barely on the cusp of bowling in this season, and they only fall 4 spots, whereas you had a couple other teams that lost earlier in the season. They fell a little bit harder, and I've noticed the trend seems to be about 5 spots, And why I think that matters is because a lot of these teams that are in this mix, especially in that top 12, obviously, a lot of these teams that are in that mix that are playing at least for a conference championship game, because there are a few that obviously aren't, but those that aren't or are in that and playing, that's where I start to look and go, okay, what happens if that team loses? If that team's right there on the edge, but they lose? You know, if you're kind of categorizing this and saying, okay, they're going to drop about 5 spots, Well, that's the way I look at it. So I say right now, at least, and we're going to look at this here in just a second, at least with this, if Georgia's ranked 5th truly in the ranking system, that means if Georgia did lose to Texas this weekend, if they fall 5 spots, you're at 10, you should still be in. Now, whether you value yourself in position to be able to host a first-round playoff game or not at that point, I'm not sure. Again, we're going to kind of dive into this. But there's a lot of moving parts in this, and I'm going to kind of pull my sheet up here to look at it because I got my handy-dandy little playoff predictor here that they put up. Right now, this is how they predict it. And again, I think all of this is really just based off of the ranking, not set in stone. Some of it, they act like it is, but we're going to see how that kind of plays out. Right now, they have Oregon at 1, obviously, so they're having the bye there regardless. Well, it does matter, obviously. Right now, their thought process is, okay, Oregon's going to win the Big Ten, so they're going to be at 1. Then you're going to have Texas at 2, which they're ranked 2nd right now. But that means they're predicting that Texas will beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. So that there puts Georgia or Texas at a 2 spot. Here's where it kind of changes up a little bit. Again, right now, SMU is at 8. They are ranked 8th, but they expect them to win the ACC, which will put them 3rd in the rankings. Even though they're ranked 8th, that would put them 3rd, also giving them that bye. And then you have number 4 BYU, who is one of the teams that's a little bit far. BYU, Boise State, that's a little further down at 10. They have them in that 4 spot, being a Mountain West champion, which I guess is technically that 5th. What do they call it? I can't even think of it at the moment. That 5th spot for a conference champion winner, but it's all based off the higher ranking. See, at first, what I thought this is Power 4, obviously the ACC, the Big 10, the Big 12, and the SEC. Those are the 4 top teams. They all 4 will get an automatic bid bye based off the conference champion. I was incorrect about that. It's actually the top 4 of the, 5, even the Power 5 rankings, that whoever it is that has the top ranking as a conference winner, those are the ones that get the top 4 at least. Now, in this case, you have ASU, Arizona State, who is ranked, I think they're outside right now. See, they're at 15th, but they're playing for the Big 12 Conference Championship, and they expect them to win that, so that gives them not necessarily an automatic bye, but it does give them that automatic bid for the 12th spot coming in and being able to play against Penn State in that. So this is where things start to get a little bit complicated. The higher ranking outside of those top 4 conference champions, those are the teams that will actually be hosting in these college football playoff first round rankings. At least they would be the ones hosting, would be the higher ranked of these. And right now they have it predicted like this. They have number 5 Penn State playing Arizona State in that, and the winner of that would move on to play in the Fiesta Bowl against Boise State. And then you would have number 6 Notre Dame playing number 11 Alabama, and they would move on to play in the Peach Bowl to play number 3 SMU. Again, based off the predictions. Again, a lot of this will come out and kind of into the wash, and we'll talk about a lot more of this on Sunday. Then you have Georgia 7 against Indiana at 10. Again, moving on to play in the Sugar Bowl against Texas. Again, this is where I start to look at things and I go, man, you have the potential right now. You already have the rematch of Texas and Georgia, which we're about to hammer right into here in just a few minutes, so stick around. But you already have that rematch. Now you're talking about the potential of a third time playing one team. At what point does the committee kind of look at this and go, all right, I mean, I get it. You know, it's fun having a team kind of play twice in a season. We saw what happened in the regular season. We're going to see what happens in a conference championship game. Now let's see what happens in a playoff scenario here. The potential of that happening 3 times. Maybe it's just, cinema, as they say, pure cinema. I don't know. Maybe they look at it that way and say, this is awesome. Or do they look at this and go, maybe it's not that awesome. Maybe this team, after they've seen somebody for a third time, it's just, we kind of have seen what's happened in this game. It doesn't really matter. Flip-flop, it could go either way. But we'll see. And then the last kind of spot on that is number 8, Ohio State playing number 9, Tennessee, and the winner of that playing in the Rose Bowl against Oregon. Again, all of this is based off predictions. A lot of things can change. Obviously, if a Penn State team beats an Oregon, something changes there. Does that drop? Does that essentially just switch them? Does that put Penn State at 1? I don't think so. If Texas wins, I think that starts to kind of swap some things around. But a couple of things that I do want to point out in here. And one of the biggest ones, and I'm going to say it because I am a Georgia fan, and it is a team who all year long and every single year I look at and I despise for the way that they seem to get in, even when it may seem like they possibly shouldn't. and that is the team that they've moved up to number 11. And they've always been right there on that edge of possibly getting into the college football playoffs, and they're there again. A Miami team who did lose, but they fell 6 spots. A team who hasn't fallen that far. Granted, again, they did lose. I understand that at the end of the season, but they fall 6 spots all the way down to number 12, and right now are the first team out of the college football playoffs at 10-2. And you're putting a 9-3 team who's not playing for conference championship. Neither is Miami. They lost, should have handled business, and they'd be in that ACC championship game. And this wouldn't be a conversation. But they fall 6 spots, and it's enough to get Alabama in. And right now, based off just what some of the committee members are saying, that's pretty set in stone. That team's pretty much in. I'm going to run through percentages here in just a minute of kind of what they were saying, what their percentages of thinking that these teams are basically in, and some of the ones that they're saying are not necessarily a given to be in. But right now, this is kind of what this looks like. They're giving Indiana, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oregon, Tennessee, Texas, Georgia, Penn State, all basically 99 to 100% chance of getting in. A lot of these teams, especially in the top 5, I don't think you can really drop out of that. Then you get Alabama at 86%. Then you get Boise State at 69%. Again, that's barring. They have to win. Then you have a 68% SMU. This is where I have the rub in this, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Iowa State at 55%. Clemson at 46%, obviously, because they're playing an ACC championship game. You win it, you're in. That does, at that point, start to kind of change things with Arizona State if they were to win, because then that kind of changes the rankings up a little bit. Arizona State at 45%, UNLV at 32%, and then Miami at 1%. Basically, Miami, you're not in. That's all there is to it. Even though you're ranked 12th, you're not getting into this playoff because you have teams below you who are vying for that 5th spot, getting into that automatic bid for being a conference champion. And I think that's Iowa State and Arizona State. Isn't that the two that are playing? Or maybe UNLV might be the one. I don't remember. It's on one of my pages. But anyways, we'll kind of get to that here in a minute. But here, let me get to my rub real quick. I know we got a lot to get to. It's a long episode. Because there's a lot going on. We're getting into the college football playoff, and essentially you have a couple of play-in playoff games this week just in conference championship games. And we kind of knew that was potentially going to happen coming into the season, but we weren't sure exactly where it would line up because you just don't know. You really don't know until you get to the end of this thing. But here's where it gets a little bit curious. When you start to look at some of these percentages that they've at least put out for what they think some of these teams have to do to get in and what they think some of these teams, they're good to go, doesn't really matter. And this is kind of where it lines up. The ACC championship game could be what changes everything because whatever happens between between Texas and Georgia, both teams for the most part are in. Whatever happens between Oregon and Penn State, both teams are basically in. Tennessee is sitting pretty. They don't have to do anything. They're just in. They don't have to play a game this weekend. They're just in. Ohio State's another one of those. Notre Dame's another one of those. They're an independent, not playing in the conference, obviously, so they won't be playing for a championship. Indiana's another one that's just kind of floating in there right now. But then you get to SMU and you get to Clemson. SMU is a team right now that I look at. They only have 68%, Clemson 46%. And that's because basically what the committee is saying in this, by giving Alabama an 86% chance to get in, is this. Clemson wins, they're in. And we're going to give Alabama that spot. SMU's out. Clemson loses, SMU's in, Alabama stays in. And that's just it. Because, again, with these other conference championship games that are happening, win or lose, basically, at least between the Big Ten and the SEC, those two teams are in. So that's 4 people right there. That's 4 teams right there, not including Indiana, not including Notre Dame, Ohio State, Tennessee, all 4 of those teams. So now we have 8 spots just in that alone. Whether it's a conference champion, not, or just floating into the playoffs, they're in regardless. Here's where I don't like it. An SMU team who, if they don't beat Clemson and they lose to them, they're kind of penalized for the fact that they just played in a conference championship game. And it's kind of like last year, I guess, in the Georgia-Alabama situation where all you had to do was win your conference championship game. But it kind of stinks for an SMU team who's ranked 8th right now. They're 11-1. At that time, they would be 11-2 and having to have played in a conference championship game. And you lose it by playing in that extra game. Now all of a sudden you're out of the playoffs. That's where I start to have a problem with this. You're playing for a conference championship game. I get it on this part. Clemson, you're playing for it, but you're ranked too low. You're ranked too low. At least one of these teams being ranked high enough to be in, but potentially getting left out, only having one loss right now, potentially getting left out for a 3-loss football team who their losses are not good. Their wins, most of them are pretty good, but their losses, they're not pretty losses. And I'm saying that about Alabama. Your loss to Vanderbilt, not great. Your loss to Oklahoma, even worse. And late into the season, even. That's the part that kind of kills me. It's like if you lose early in the season, you're usually pretty good, but Alabama just lost a couple of weeks ago. And they have the potential right now of sliding their way in based on an SMU win or loss. So right now, part of me does kind of say, okay, I kind of want Clemson to win so that way maybe SMU and Clemson do get in, because I believe, as much as I don't necessarily think Clemson should get in either, you win your conference championship, that's all there is to it. But right now, 11-1 SMU team, if they lost and fall to 11-2, to me, it doesn't seem like that's a team that should be left out for a 9-3 Alabama team to slide in. Just my humble opinion on that. That's all there is to it. That's how I feel about it, and that's really the only rub in here right now. There's a little bit, obviously, with Arizona State and UNLV and Boise and some of these other teams that it does make it a little bit more complicated with that. But at least most of those, they're ranked right on the edge. You got Arizona State 15, Iowa State 16, Clemson at 17, UNLV at 20, and then Boise State right there at 10. So again, you kind of ride that line. Again, Boise State's another one. They're playing for a conference championship game against UNLV, and 11-1 Boise State at that. And then you have a 10-2 UNLV at that. Boise State loses, more than likely they're out of the college football playoffs because they're right there on the edge, even though they just played in a conference championship game. That's where this starts to get a little bit difficult to me, when you have a one-loss team who's playing for a championship game, who, if they lose that conference championship game, you're just out. It's bust. I'm sorry, you got 2 losses, but we're going to give this 3-loss team a shot in. And I know I'm saying a lot of this at the same time of the potential of Texas upsetting Georgia, and I'm going to call it an upset because right now, even though Texas is the favorite, I think we know, based on what happened in the season, what could essentially happen again in the SEC championship game. And I understand that there's a potential that Georgia could have 3 losses at that point, but again, I don't think you should be penalized for playing in that when you're ranked 5th in the country. Just my humble opinion. Again, Ohio State, 10-2. They're not having to play in a game to potentially be 10-3. And they're ranked 6th. I don't think they would fall out. Tennessee, 10-2. Not having to play for a conference championship game. Again, they're in. If they did and lost, more likely would still be in because they're ranked high enough. That's where it's kind of tough for some of these teams who are right there on the edge, and it's like win, do or die. That's all there is to it. And I kind of hate it for some of those teams. So there is still a little bit of drama in this college football playoff, even though we thought, hey, let's do 12. 12 is going to kind of get away from that. It's going to be simple, chalk, fill in the blanks, basically. And we're going to walk right through this and make it a little bit easier on ourselves. That didn't happen. You still have a little bit of controversy right here. And I'm just very curious about what's going to come out with that on Sunday. The games have to play themselves out on Saturday, and there's the potential that it's chalk. There is a potential that this that they marked up is exactly what happens. SMU wins, Boise State wins, Arizona State wins, all of those teams win, and then again, you just wonder. It's like, okay, well, I guess you have that open spot then. Who do you give it to? And I still kind of feel bad for Miami on that point because, again, 2 losses. You lost last week. Stinks for sure. Again, an Alabama team who lost 2 weeks ago really, really badly to a not good Oklahoma team. 3 losses. I just don't like that. Just me. And I would say that I think either way, regardless of this point. Do I like Alabama? No. I think we've all determined that, especially if you've watched or listened to this long enough, you've determined that. But whether they get in, it's not a fear of playing them again because I'd love to play them again. It's the fact that I don't think that they belong. It's just all there is to it. Now, let's kind of start to move on to some of the other stuff. Obviously, signing day just happened. Georgia's right there on the cusp of having that number 1 team, our number 1 recruiting class again coming into this season. I know it's right there on the edge, I think, between Georgia and Texas, matter of fact. We'll see tomorrow, Friday, kind of rounds that out for signing day. Again, I don't follow a lot of the recruiting. Again, I can look at some of these guys and tell you who's coming to Georgia and tell you who's not, but I don't stick with it because a lot of times they don't stick with it. We have guys who have committed to us for a long time and have flipped just this week alone, and I think more of that's going to happen before we ever even get into the season. Obviously, transfer portal has heated up also a lot. We know a Georgia player at least that's going to be moving, but there's a lot of other players who have already put their name in as well. And I think, again, that opens up 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. I can't remember exactly the day. But that'll open up and those guys can go. So another thing to kind of look at there as well. Hey, again, I appreciate you guys being here so far. Let's kind of get into the injury updates, and then we're going to break this game down really quickly. At least on Georgia's part, I'm not really looking a lot at Texas in this as far as the injury report went. I know they're struggling as far as the running back goes. They figured a lot out against Texas A&M last week, so I think they're going to be okay on that point. But on our side of the ball, this is going to matter a little bit more. Joseph Ajanye, he's out as a defensive lineman. We kind of knew that coming into this. A couple of the questionables, which was not the same as last week. Obviously, last week we were without Trevor Etienne. He is questionable this week, so that is at least an upgrade. We'll see. I'm sure it's probably a game-time decision. He was a huge part of this first matchup against Texas earlier in the season. Something to look at there. Branson Robinson, also questionable. I think I did see him a couple of times in that Georgia Tech game. Chauncey Bowens, he is questionable coming into this. And then Krista Miller, also questionable on the defensive line. Again, another viable part on that defensive line that would be important to have in this one. So we're going to see a lot of this looks like it's going to be game time decision. Could be a warm-up. Hey, how you feel? Feeling good? All right, let's get you in there. If we can't, we can't. I'm sure Trevor at this point is going to be grinding to do everything he can to get on the field. Again, especially considering just how much this game was impacted by his presence alone the first go-around. So let's dive into it. Let's get to it. Georgia, Texas, SEC championship game. What have we run already? I can't even tell because I don't have it up on my thing. I don't know how far we've gotten into this already because I don't have my timer running, but we're just now getting into it. SEC championship game, ABC, 4 o'clock Eastern time, Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta. This is Georgia's 4th straight SEC championship game appearance, and Georgia, of those 4, 3 previous appearances, has only won 1 of those. This matters a lot to Kirby, and I think it's starting to matter more to the players. Obviously, we talked about this earlier. Does this actually matter? Does it matter to win this game? Does it matter to play? Because just a few weeks ago, you had coaches telling you, hey, I don't even want to play in that game because if I play in it and I'm possibly going to have what happens with SMU happen to where if I lose that game and I'm punished because I'm playing in that game, I don't want to play in it. I'd rather not play in that game if I'm going to be punished if I lost it. So I can kind of see that, but at the same time, I see here where it's like, hey, you win it, you get a championship ring for that. You get a bye into the playoffs. You get that 3-week break that a lot of these other teams are going to get because they don't have to play in a conference championship game. It's when you lose that it's very, very difficult because win, you only got to win 3 more games. Lose, you got to win 4 games, and you just played 1 also on top of that. So it makes that season stretch out a little bit longer, which obviously injuries and things of that nature heat up too. Georgia, this will be their 13th appearance, and in those 12 appearances previously, Georgia is only 4-7. A lot of these games have happened here recently, especially, and Georgia's just not particularly dominant when it comes to the SEC championship game. I'm hoping we can kind of turn that stride a little bit this season as well. Obviously, we're in it last year, lost to Alabama. In it the year before when winning the national championship game and beating LSU. And the year before that, lost it, but did go on to win the national championship that season. So, again, like we talked about there, if you win this game, you get the round 1 bye into the playoffs, which is huge. And right now, based on these predictions, at least, if you lose this, more than likely you're going to face off against Indiana. Don't know exactly how that works because you're ranked 5th now. If you lose, does that still put you in 7th? And you're playing a 10th ranked team, you would at least host Indiana in Athens when that time comes, if that's the way that goes. I don't know. Again, we'll kind of determine that once we get past this game. First, let's kind of get into it and see what's going to happen in it. Obviously, back on October 19th, Georgia did win this game 30-15, and like I said in it, Trevor Etienne was a huge part, having 3 touchdowns in that game. Carson Beck had a struggle game. This is where a lot of that conversation, we talked about this last week, but this is where a lot of that conversation came up of, hey, can Carson kind of get out of his own way? Because at that time, he was really starting to get into that struggle, if he wasn't already kind of halfway into it, where it was like, man, he's throwing a lot of interceptions and he's not throwing a lot of touchdowns at the same time. And we need him to play better. And here's the good thing about this. Georgia has to replicate a couple of things in this game, mainly on defense. If Georgia can play the defense that they played back in October against Texas the first time, you stand a good chance just in that alone. But I also fully understand and I'm aware Texas is also going to make those adjustments. They also know, hey, offensively, we have to be better. We have to hit the shots when they're there. We have to be able to affect this. Our offensive line has to be able to affect this defensive line and the front that Georgia was pushing in. But also in coverage, Georgia's defense was elite in that football game. If Georgia's defense can play up to par the way they did last time, Georgia stands a good chance to win. Now, if you top that by also saying, Carson Beck, you've got to play the way that you've been playing at least the last 4 weeks, 3 weeks at least, where he's been a lot more efficient. Yardage is looking better. We're not having those turnovers as much as we had before. And he's throwing touchdowns. That's what we need. If we can see a Carson Beck who's confident when he first comes into the game and is elite throughout the entire football game while also matching that on the can't speak. Hit the rewind right quick. Let me just kind of start myself over. If he can play the kind of football game we know Carson Beck can play, and this defense replicates what it did in that first matchup, I don't think Georgia can be beat. I don't think Georgia can be beat against Texas in the SEC championship game, and I don't think Georgia can be beat by any other team. And it's always been this question mark all season. Everybody's talked about it every single week. What version of Georgia are you going to get? Are you getting the first half of the Alabama game, Georgia? If so, rough night. Are you getting the same Texas team that you played the time before? Are you getting that kind of a matchup with Georgia? Are you getting the game that you had against Tech, where you didn't really wake up until late, into the fourth quarter for that game? All of these things kind of matter, and they're all valid because it's the team that Georgia's been this year. Georgia, we talked about every week, consistency has probably been the biggest thing. Consistency throughout an entire season has not been there. We've had games where Georgia looks like world beaters. You're not going to beat them. You cannot beat this football team. And then we've had other games that we've played where it's like, man, you could get beat by anybody. And that's happened. We had the couple of losses throughout the season. And we're going to see. We're going to see what kind of team comes out. But I know one thing's for sure. Generally, when we get into this crunch time, this time of the season, this is where Georgia starts to shine. And I think Kirby's aware of that. I think a lot of the players are aware of that. Luckily, you have a lot of guys who have played in this football game. Again, this is Georgia's 4th straight appearance in this SEC championship game. They're not fearful of coming into this place. They've done it. A lot of these players have been a part of it. They know the routine of what's about to happen. They've been into this. Texas, on the other hand, has not. They haven't played in the SEC all season. They also don't have the same schedule that a Georgia team does. They have not faced the adversity that Georgia has throughout the season, and by the way, has overcome for the most part. A couple of the games in the season, obviously, it didn't. Let's take, for example, the Alabama game. You were down 28-0. You came back, had a lead at one point in that game. The chance to win it and put it away, didn't do that. But you faced the adversity. You rose to it. Georgia Tech, you're down. Probably should have lost that game. Went to 8 overtimes. Fought your way back, won it. You were down against Tennessee at home. Fought your way back, won it. They have faced the adversity. They've faced the schedule that says, hey, you got to grind all season to get here. But you are going to be put in the position where you're going to play the toughest teams throughout the entire season. Georgia has done that. Not saying Texas hasn't completely. Texas has faced some similar opponents in this. They've faced a Florida team who played them not quite as good as they played Georgia. But Texas has faced a couple of these teams that they've also kind of struggled with as well. I hope it's the Georgia team that shows up confidently and says, hey, we've been through this adversity. Texas, you hadn't seen this adversity. The only thing that I hope is we have the legs underneath us to be able to continue to fight through this game because it's been a long season. There hasn't been a break in a long time since before the Florida game, which has been a long time ago by now. Obviously, you're talking about the end of October there. That's over a month ago. Over a month ago now. It's a lot of football that's been played since then, and a lot of football hopefully is still yet to be played. Looking forward to what can happen in this game, though. Texas is a 2.5-point favorite in this. They do come in as a 2.5-point favorite. Interesting. Not terribly surprising. Obviously, they're the number 2 team in the country. It's very, very hard to beat a team twice in a season. I think the most recent I can remember is Utah doing it to Oregon. Wasn't it Utah? Or was it USC that Utah beat like twice? Or was it Oregon that beat them twice? I don't remember. It's kind of hard for me to remember. But it's very difficult to beat a team twice in a season. And we're going to see if Georgia can do that. If there's a team that can, it's the confident version of Georgia. It's the team that beat Georgia or Texas the first time in this that I believe Georgia can do that if that team will show up. Right now, Georgia's coming in here 34 points per game, ranked 25th in the country. Giving up 20 points per game, ranked 25th in the country. Pretty well balanced right there. One of the things that I did notice in this, and I saw one of these things kind of pop up, and they go through kind of some of the SEC rankings of, hey, here's your passing leaders. And Carson Beck's like third on that list as far as passing yardage and all. And then it kind of popped up something that was very, very interesting to me. And me and a couple guys had a conversation about this earlier today. And it was the SEC rushing category and the rushing leaders in the SEC throughout the season. Kind of mind-boggling. A Georgia player didn't show up on this. Nowhere. Diego Pavia, the quarterback for Vanderbilt, showed up on this list before I ever even saw Georgia's logo show up at like 700 yards. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh, no wonder. Georgia doesn't have a rushing leader right now that's in that. Nate Frazier, I think, has rushed over 500 yards and leads that. And then you have Trevor Etienne that's not far behind him. But one thing I did say was, hey, most other teams, they're running just one running back, and he's going to get a bunch of yardage, and he's going to get a bunch of carries. One thing Georgia has kind of prided themselves on here, at least since I can remember even really back to the early days, is Georgia's going to have multiple running backs. We're not just going to have one guy that we hand it off to 30, 35 times in a game. You're going to have multiple guys that you're going to give the ball to. First of all, it's going to give you fresh legs when they come in there. Momentum is one thing I've always been a little bit curious. Does that kind of slow the momentum if you've got one guy who's just power, keep handing it to him and he can run? I've wondered if that's kind of bit us a little bit. Not really sure. Don't know the analytics as far as that goes. But you're going to be rested. You got some running backs who have been in the league for just a couple of years and they're beat up. And you don't have a long tenured career being a running back when that's happening. But at least coming from Georgia, you kind of still have your legs under you by the time you get to the league. So that is at least one benefit to it. But you're not going to see these individual accolades in college if that's something that you're looking for. Regardless, Georgia still has some stout and elite and incredible running backs. And we've had those guys from Kendall Milton, obviously back to Sony and Nick and the guys that we've got in the room this year. So I'm excited to see what they can do. Again, I think Trevor Etienne has a potential to be big in this game again. I still feel like Nate is still a guy, too, to kind of give you those runs as well. Love to see the Robinsons kind of get back in there, and obviously Cash Jones as well, see what these guys can do back there. Right now, Georgia not really rushing for a lot in per game, at least. 128 is the yardage, just under 2 touchdowns. And a lot of that is because we kind of get down the field and then, obviously start to hand the ball off. Georgia right now averaging about 297 through the air, defensively giving up almost 200 yards. And here's the difference in the categories that I've noticed this season that has always been flip-flop. Georgia's giving up a little bit more run offense than they have in the past. 135.8 is what they're averaging giving up on the ground. Georgia usually is the opposite of that. Georgia's usually getting more than they're giving. This year, not quite that case. And a lot of that, they're running on the outside. This is one thing I did notice about the Texas and Texas A&M game last week. Texas was doing really good at gashing the gaps and going right up the middle and just running all over Texas A&M. For the most part, you're not going to run up the middle against Georgia. It's just not going to happen. They tried that in the first go-around and got away from it really quickly and went to the air a whole lot more, which, again, credit out to Georgia's secondary. They covered guys really well, but you're not going to run the football up the middle for the most part against Georgia. The edge, you can have some success on because we've had a little bit more trouble kind of defending those edges. That's going to be important. It's going to be really important in this game to kind of see what they match up in this. One of the other things that I did put on here that we really want to kind of remember, and we did a great job of this. Obviously, Quinn Ewers was a little beat up kind of coming into that first game. They bench him. They put Arch in. Arch can run. One of the biggest things we've noticed, obviously, in the times that he's come in this season is he can run. But my other biggest thing is I don't want us to get so hesitant on the fact that, hey, if he's in the game, he's running, that all of a sudden he throws because he can do that too. He can do both of them. He's fast and he's got an arm. Now, we did a great job tempering that when he first came in. Obviously, he's still young. He doesn't have a lot of starting experience. He doesn't have a lot of experience playing in the SEC as a whole. And the schedule and the teams like a Georgia team that he's faced that first time, but could potentially face even more in this SEC championship game. And he makes mistakes. He's not able to get the reads that he needs and wants. I'm sure, again, they're going to be working on that all week, but that's something that we kind of have to be prepared for. You're going to have to prepare for both of these quarterbacks because I still don't think Quinn Ewers is 100%. So I'm sure we're going to see it Arch at some point in time or just mixed in here and there. I don't really think it's going to be a Quinn and then Arch drive. I don't think it's going to be back and forth drives or anything like that. I think it's really going to be Quinn running most of it, and then you're going to get Arch occasionally. And, Quinn might run something and get to 3rd and 4, and then all of a sudden Arch is in to kind of give you that extra opportunity of, hey, he can throw it, but he can also run it and probably get you that first. So something we've really got to be prepared for on defense. I didn't really come into this with a lot of the keys to the game, but I would say my biggest keys to this game, not giving you, I know in years past I've kind of done, all right, here's 3 bullet points offensively, here's 3 defensively. But for me, this entire football game is going to be this. Replicate what you did on defense the first time, and then Carson Beck turn it around this game. Don't replicate what you did in the first game, because that was a little bit tougher. I think he was like 3 interceptions, maybe 1 touchdown in that game. I can't fully remember. But if Carson Beck can turn this game around and have the game of his life in this SEC championship game, and this defense plays the same way that it did in that first go-round, no doubt in my mind Georgia can win this football game. Third, I would just give it a 3rd point. Cannot have the turnovers. The turnovers, when you give that other team that momentum and you give that other team those opportunities, it's where you get yourself in trouble. Cannot have that coming into this game. So that would be my keys to the game. Same exact defense that showed up the first time. Bring them on this time. Carson Beck turned things around in this game. In comparison to that last time, don't turn the football over. And then that's kind of where I stand on this. I'm not giving a score prediction. I know usually by the time we get to this point in the season, I'm just like, hey, let's do it on the field. And I've gotten away from it a lot more, obviously, since I haven't really been doing many episodes here lately. But that's kind of my thing in this one. I think Georgia is still in a really good position. I know, man, it's hard. That's the only thing I kind of harp on in this is it's so difficult to beat a team twice in a season, because we just learn, we adapt. After you do something the first time, you've learned, and you might not do it perfectly the second time, but you can still learn from what you did the first time to do better and better yourself in that second go around. And my thing about this is, and we always say that, and I've said it obviously here, and I'm just now saying it, just because Texas lost it the first time, and yes, they're going to better and try to fix the things that they did incorrectly, Georgia's going to do the same thing. There are things that Georgia needed to clean up in this game, offensively for the most part, but even a few things here and there on defense that Georgia's also going to look to correct those things that they did differently. And I don't really know that Georgia's going to come in with a whole different game plan and try to say, hey, let's do this differently. Let's try a different route to just throw them all off. But I know that Georgia's also going to be trying to correct some of the things that they did in the first time of this game, especially offensively, to try to turn things even better in their favor into this game. I feel really good about Georgia's chances into this game. Usually kind of when we get a little bit closer, and I'm sure tomorrow, I'm not really sure Saturday, by the time we get there, how the feelings will be. But I usually start to get a little bit nervous up ahead of time. Right now, I'm just kind of limbo. I'm really neutral and I think a lot of it is because I feel like even if Georgia doesn't make it through this game unscathed, that at least you're still in the playoffs, whereas last year it was one of those, obviously, nail biters, and we know how that ended. But I feel really good, really good about Georgia's chances in this game. Again, barring you have got to turn things around offensively. We've played great the last few weeks offensively. I'd love to see us do that. Maybe a little sooner than the fourth quarter. Should we turn that on offensively? That would be great for sure. But I also kind of want Mike Bobo to kind of get in his bag, and I think he did that a little bit against Texas. I'd love to see that again. Obviously, defense kind of shake things up as well. That would be awesome, and I look forward to seeing what Georgia's going to do in this game. One other note that I didn't talk about before, I wanted to kind of get into this before we talked about it. In that game, there were some fans that threw some stuff out on the field. And what did Texas athletics come out and say? They said, hey, we're going to do our best. We're going to do our best to come in here, and we're going to attempt to find people who threw stuff on the field and punish them. Texas comes out this week, and they said, we have found nobody. We were not able to identify anybody who threw a single piece of trash on the field. So there's nothing we can do. I found that to be just slightly interesting. A little funny, slightly interesting. Thought that was just a random little tidbit that I would hit you guys with that I saw earlier. You guys may have seen it earlier as well. And I completely closed out of my page. Way to go, guy. Way to go. So, that's what we got, obviously, SEC Championship game. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm going to pull up some of our other games that are going on around the country this week, because you've got the other conference championship games that are going on as well. And this is kind of how they line up. Again, I think we talked about this earlier, which this is going to be your fifth of the Power technically it's Power 4. I don't like this. It's gotten really confusing. It used to be Power 4, Pot 5. Now it's like Power 4 with the at-large 5th. And that's Boise State and UNLV. They play at 8 o'clock on Friday. So we're going to know who you're getting out of that at least on Friday night. Army, Tulane play, Western Kentucky, Jacksonville State play. None of those games are going to matter. But then Saturday we get to the games that obviously do. I'm gonna run through the few that don't. Ohio and Miami are playing at 12 o'clock. Marshall and Louisiana are playing at 7:30. Again, those games don't matter. Would have mattered had Marshall not beat JMU, because you'd have Georgia Southern playing against Louisiana State, at least in the Sun Belt Championship. But that's not happening for our fans and friends up there at Southern. But anyways, now we get to the big ones. Obviously, you got Arizona State and Iowa State playing in the Big 12. Winner goes, loser goes home. So that's a matter. Obviously, Georgia, Texas. Looks like both of these teams, win or lose, are going to be in. That one again at 4 o'clock. Then you get Penn State, Oregon. That's at 8 o'clock on CBS that night. Again, whichever one of these teams wins or loses, both of them look to be in. And then the last one to round the night out at the same time, Penn State and Oregon are playing, which kind of stinks that these are happening at the same exact time, but I guess it'll give you an opportunity to kind of flip back and forth. You get number 17, Clemson, playing SMU, number 8, at 8 o'clock also. Again, I don't know on this one. I don't know if this is a winner go home situation. For Clemson, it is. You got to win to get in. If you don't, you just go play in a bowl game. For SMU, they're the ones I don't know about, and they're probably really the only team I don't know about where I don't know if they win, they're in, obviously, but I don't know if they lose, if they're out. They're right there on that edge, and it's really leaning the way that it seems like if they lose, they're out, which is unfortunate for them. Obviously, having a great season, only one loss on the season. Kind of stinks to play in your championship game and potentially be left out because of that. Some of your lines and your favorites in this, obviously, let's see, Boise State's a 4-point favorite in that game. Arizona State's a 2-point favorite in theirs. Again, Texas a 2.5-point favorite. Oregon is a 3.5-point favorite, and SMU is a 2-point favorite. So we have really, really tight lines in these matchups. You don't have anything that's just astronomically different. Similar to, I think, like a Georgia and LSU a couple of years ago. That line, I think, was like 13.5. It was a fairly decent line in that matchup, but you don't have that this season. So it's kind of fun that you get a little bit of that consistency of close games. Should be really good football games, a couple of which they matter at least for the bye, but for getting in the playoffs, they don't matter. But again, a couple of them, they matter a lot. That 8 o'clock game, Clemson and SMU in the ACC championship game, it's huge. Matters a lot. That's what we got. Closing things out right here. Obviously, the final playoffs is going to come out Sunday. I look forward to seeing what the Dogs do on Saturday against Texas again at 4 o'clock. Hoping the Dogs can get a win in there. I'd greatly love to get that bye and have to wait one more week, but also get that one more week to prepare for the college football playoffs. But hey, it's here. The regular season's over. I mean, it's like this season just flew by. Every single year, it seems like it just gets faster and faster and just season's over before you know it. Feels like it starts and it's over 3 weeks later, even though it's actually been a couple of months. But we're here. College football playoff ranking. Again, the final will come out on Sunday. I may wait until that comes out because it generally seems like it comes out that afternoon. I'll probably wait until that comes out and maybe record later on Sunday, recapping the SEC championship game, and then obviously we're going to know where we stand in those playoff rankings. We'll get another episode out, and we'll be able to go from there. But I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to this rematch, Georgia-Texas, round 2 in this one. We'll check in with you guys later on. Go Dogs.